The sea has always been man's oldest ally and his greatest enemy. But once, in the heart of the Mediterranean, the water itself turned against humanity. They said the sea burned, that flames rose from the waves. Fishermen saw their nets melt in their hands. Sailors screamed as black fire swallowed their ships. For days, the horizon glowed red, and when the smoke cleared, an entire fleet was gone. Centuries later, divers found something impossible: charred anchors fused with rock, black glassy sand that shouldn't exist, and ship remains covered in a strange, oily crust. Scientists can't explain it. Some say it was a volcanic eruption, others whisper it was a weapon, older than any empire, buried by time. What really happened that day when the sea turned to fire? And what secret did the Mediterranean hide for 700 years? Welcome to Sea Shadows, where the ocean remembers what history forgot. The morning began in silence. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the heavy kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. The fishermen of Sicily rowed out as they always did, their oars dipping into calm, glass-like water. The Mediterranean had been gentle for weeks, too gentle. The old men at the harbor said the sea was thinking. They had seen this before storms, before tragedy. Still, the younger sailors laughed it off. The horizon was clear, the breeze soft, and the smell of salt filled their lungs. Out there, in that endless blue, something began to stir. It started with the sound, a low rumble beneath the waves, like a beast awakening far below. The men leaned over the sides of their boats, hearing the faint metallic groan that rose from the deep. The birds vanished. The wind stopped. Then, without warning, the sea trembled. It wasn't a wave. It was as if the ocean floor itself shifted. The sailors looked to each other, eyes wide. The youngest whispered, "It's coming." Then came the light. Not the sun's light, but a blinding white flare that split the horizon in two. The air turned dry, searing their throats. The smell of sulfur filled the boats, and suddenly, the sea began to burn. Flames leapt across the waves, red and black, licking at the sails. The fishermen screamed. Nets caught fire in their hands. One boat simply vanished in the flash, gone in a breath. Another burst apart, wood raining down like sparks from a forge. The ocean, their home, had become an inferno. From the cliffs above Palermo, people ran to the edge. Mothers clutched their children. The priests fell to their knees, ringing bells that no one could hear over the roar. A curtain of black smoke rose, so high it dimmed the sun. Those who lived closest to the shore said they felt the heat on their faces, as if the sky itself had opened. The water bled red, the air was filled with ash, and then came the silence again. Not peace, the terrible silence that follows death. For hours, the sea hissed like iron cooling after fire. Dead fish floated to the surface, their scales burned off, their eyes white and empty. Wooden fragments drifted in, still smoldering. A man found a piece of sailcloth turned to glass. Others picked up stones, black and smooth, that burned the skin if held too long. In the small village of Cefalu, they buried these objects, believing them cursed. They said that night the moon refused to rise. Days turned to weeks. Families gathered on the shore, staring at the horizon. They waited for the ships that would never return. Children grew up hearing the stories, how their fathers were swallowed by fire, how the sea took revenge for something man had done. The tales spread through ports and taverns. The day the water burned, time moved on. Centuries washed the memory away, until one day, the past resurfaced. In 1972, a small research vessel from Naples set out to map the Sicilian Trench. It was a routine mission, calm seas, nothing remarkable. But 40 meters down, their sonar caught something strange, a flat, reflective layer beneath the sediment. Divers went in to check. What they found shouldn't have existed. Imagine a seabed of glass, sheets of black, smooth as mirrors, fused with twisted metal, rusted anchors locked into stone. Everything looked melted, as if a blast furnace had swept across the ocean floor. The divers reported a metallic taste in the water. Their gauges flickered wildly. One of them, an engineer named Pietro, swore he felt the ground vibrate, like a pulse, faint but alive. They collected samples, small fragments of that black glass, and returned to the surface. When they broke the surface, the sky had turned red with sunset. The men looked at each other, pale, silent. The expedition leader noted that the air smelled faintly of smoke, though there was no fire, no nearby island, nothing. Back in Naples, the samples were sent to labs in France and Germany. The analysis took months. When the reports came back, they all said the same thing. This glass was not volcanic. It contained compounds that shouldn't exist naturally. Traces of metallic elements fused at temperatures higher than any eruption could produce. One geologist, before leaving the project abruptly, wrote something in his field notes that was later leaked to the press. "It's not from below. It came from above." That line haunted the few who dared talk about it. What came from above? A meteor? A weapon? Or something humanity once knew and then forgot? As the research continued, strange events followed. 2 of the divers fell ill, their skin showing burns that never healed properly. Equipment went missing from the lab, and an anonymous letter arrived at the University of Naples, warning them to stop digging. The letter ended with one chilling phrase: "The sea remembers." The world had forgotten the fire of the sea, but the sea had not forgotten the world. Decades after the divers' discovery, historians began searching for answers that science couldn't provide. They dug through archives in Palermo, Barcelona, and the Vatican, searching for a clue to the event that burned the Mediterranean. In 1984, a Spanish historian named Clara Benitez found something remarkable: a collection of sealed letters written in the 14th century by a royal engineer serving under King Peter IV of Aragon. The letters were hidden inside an old naval logbook, preserved in salt-stiff pages that smelled faintly of ash. The handwriting was faded, uneven, as if written in fear. The writer called himself Marco de Viano, and what he described sounded impossible. He wrote of an experiment meant to change the future of warfare, a fire that would float upon the sea. A device designed to burn enemy fleets where water could not stop it. It was said to be powered by a mixture of oil, minerals, and a mysterious black powder brought from the east. "The king called it a divine gift," Marco wrote, "but when we tested it, it burned the hand of God." The letters described a test off the coast of Sicily. The experiment was to remain secret. Only 3 ships were involved, one carrying the weapon, 2 observing. On the morning of the test, the winds changed direction, pushing the smoke back toward the fleet. Something went wrong. Marco wrote of a sound like thunder without clouds, and then nothing. His last words were smeared by ink and salt water. "The fire does not die. It eats the sea." Clara published her findings, but few believed her. The church called it myth. Historians called it coincidence. Yet the more they tried to dismiss it, the more fragments appeared. A monk's diary from Palermo mentioned Blackwater and souls on fire. An Arabic navigator's chart from Tunis marked a section of sea as Beit al-Nayar, the House of Fire. It was drawn in the same area where the divers found the melted glass. By the late 1980s, a quiet group of scientists, linguists, and naval historians formed a private research unit funded by unnamed donors to test whether such a weapon could have existed. They recreated ancient mixtures of crude oil, sulfur, and mineral salts described in Greek and Arabic texts. Nothing came close, until one day, a chemist named Dr. Renard discovered that when he exposed certain minerals from Sicilian volcanic ash to intense heat and oil vapor, they created a reaction that burned even underwater. The reaction was brief, unstable, but terrifyingly real. It produced a black, oily flame that clung to the surface, hissing and spitting sparks, just as the old sailors had described. Renard called it black fire. His notes said, "It's like the sea is breathing flame." News of his discovery spread quietly among military researchers, but before it could reach the public, Dr. Renard died in a car accident on a rainless night. His laboratory was found empty, the samples gone. Only his notebook remained, pages warped by heat, as if someone had tried to burn them but stopped halfway. In those notes, there was a sketch, a simple outline of a metal container with 2 chambers and an ignition tube. Above it, he had written one line, "Designed for ships, not for survival." Meanwhile, in the Sicilian fishing towns, the old stories began to return. Strange red glows were seen beneath the water late at night. A fisherman near Trapani reported catching a fish with scales that looked burned, though there had been no fire. Another claimed he saw an ancient anchor rise slowly from the deep, glowing faintly like molten iron before sinking again. Locals began avoiding the area entirely. Tourists were told it was haunted, cursed, or worse, contaminated. But some divers kept going. They said that the deeper they went, the warmer the water became, as if something below was still alive, still smoldering. In 1996, an Italian documentary crew attempted to film the site. Their footage, only half recovered, shows blurred shapes, black streaks, and one haunting frame of what looks like a massive, circular scar on the seafloor. A diver can be heard on the tape saying, "It's breathing." Moments later, the feed cuts out. The tapes were confiscated, never broadcast. After that, the story was quietly sealed. Scientists were told to stop exploring, governments denied any interest, and news outlets never followed up. But beneath the silence, the sea waited. There's a phrase local fishermen still use today when the wind shifts suddenly from the south. Il mare si ricorda, the sea remembers. They say it's not superstition. It's warning, because if Marco de Viano's letters were real, if man once created a weapon powerful enough to ignite the sea, then the question isn't whether the black tide happened again, but when it will. By the early 2000s, the world had mostly forgotten the legend of the black tide. The Mediterranean was now a paradise for tourists, not a place of forgotten nightmares. The coasts shimmered with resorts, the sea glowed blue, and the only fire was from the sun. But the sea never truly forgets. In 2004, an underwater mapping team from France was scanning sections of the Sicilian Trench, part of a geological survey for undersea cables. They weren't looking for history, just data. Yet one morning, as their sonar swept over the western shelf, they noticed something impossible. A vast circular depression, over a mile wide, with metallic reflections scattered across the center. It looked less like a natural crater and more like the remains of something melted, fused, and then buried by centuries of sediment. At first, they assumed it was volcanic. But when they checked the surrounding temperature, the readings were inconsistent. Colder on the outside, unnaturally warm within. The data suggested something beneath the seafloor was generating heat. Slowly, consistently, like embers under ash. Dr. Camille Durand, the lead oceanographer, decided to investigate. She was methodical, skeptical, the kind of scientist who didn't believe in myths. But she also respected history. She brought a small dive team and a remote submersible, Ariel. They descended into the darkness on a calm September morning. The sea was silent, unnervingly still. At 800 meters down, the light vanished. The cameras switched to infrared. What they saw next defied reason. The seabed was covered in a thin layer of soot-like material, black, glistening, shifting with the current. As the submersible approached the crater's edge, the sensors began to fail, one by one. Electrical interference. Then, out of the murk, a faint orange glow appeared. It wasn't volcanic. It was too smooth, too controlled. The glow flickered rhythmically, like the pulse of something alive. Dr. Durand described it later as a heartbeat in the dark. When they got closer, the camera picked up twisted metal, not rock, but fragments of what looked like hull plating fused into the seabed. On one piece, a pattern was visible, an emblem resembling a medieval seal. A lion, half burned away. That was the last clear image the sub ever sent. Seconds later, the feed dissolved into static. Then the water around the sub seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from a desert road, and communication was lost. The divers surfaced an hour later, shaken, pale. One of them claimed to have seen fire underwater. Another refused to speak at all. When the data logs were recovered, They found fragments of radiation readings, mild but distinct, and a sound, faint, repeating like the hiss of gas escaping metal dot or breathing. The team's sponsors immediately classified the information. The press release said only that the dive was inconclusive, but the truth leaked slowly. A few screenshots, a few audio clips, a short video uploaded anonymously, only seconds long, showing a glowing field under the sea, as if embers were drifting in slow motion. It spread across early internet forums, labeled the underwater flame. Then it vanished. Accounts deleted. Servers wiped. By 2008, rumors began circulating that NATO had quietly restricted access to parts of the Sicilian Trench, citing environmental hazards. Fishing vessels were warned away. Independent divers who ignored the warning came back with strange burns, not chemical, not thermal, as if they'd brushed against something still radiating energy. Dr. Durand resigned from her post. She disappeared from the public eye, but in her private notes, later discovered by her son, she wrote something chilling. It's not a myth. The black tide was real, and it's waking up. Her final entry contained coordinates, not to the Sicilian Trench, but further east, near Cyprus. Another heat anomaly, smaller but identical. Whatever burned the sea centuries ago had moved. Today, oceanographers report an increasing number of thermal irregularities across the Mediterranean. They're minor, scattered, but eerily consistent in pattern, as if tracing a path. Some believe it's geological. Others whisper it's something else. Something ancient. Something designed. And when you look closely at satellite images at night, you'll see faint, glowing rings in certain coastal waters, small, circular scars visible only for a few minutes before fading into the blue. Officials call it bioluminescence, but those who know the legend of the black tide don't agree. Because the Mediterranean has always been a cradle of civilization, and sometimes of its warnings. What if Marco de Viano's invention wasn't just a weapon, but an accident? A fire that changed the chemistry of the sea itself. A chain reaction that never truly stopped. The ocean doesn't forget. It only waits. And one day, when the balance tilts again, when oil, heat, and human arrogance mix once more, the black fire will rise and the sea will burn again. Maybe not as myth, not as history, but as prophecy. Maybe that's why, even now, sailors crossing the Mediterranean speak of nights when the water glows faintly red, when the engines hum too loud, and radios catch whispers not meant for this world. The scientists call it coincidence, the old fishermen call it a warning. But deep down, you and I both know the sea remembers. Every ship, every voice, every spark that ever fell into its depths. And if the black tide really did awaken once, who's to say it won't again? The next chapter of this story isn't buried in history. It's moving beneath our feet right now. Stay close, traveler, because next time we go deeper, where the truth still breathes, waiting to be found. You've been watching Sea Shadows, and the ocean has more secrets to tell.